When you look at a modern professional football stadium, what do you actually see? You probably see a massive field, those blindingly bright lights, maybe tens of thousands of cheering fans. But honestly, that's just the illusion. To truly understand the modern sports industry, we have to stop looking at the field and start looking at the contracts, the subsidies, and all that concrete surrounding it. Welcome to The Explainer on the true economics of owning a USA-based football stadium. Let's dive right in.
Okay, $5.5 billion. That staggering figure right there was the construction cost of SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. Built by Rams owner Stan Kroenke, it literally holds the title as the most expensive stadium ever built in human history. To put a massive number like that into perspective for you, constructing a world-class skyscraper like the Freedom Tower in New York cost less than $4 billion. We're talking about an absolutely astronomical amount of capital poured into one single highly specialized venue.
And right here is where the math starts getting incredibly tricky. 17. That is the combined total number of regular season NFL home games the Los Angeles Rams and the Chargers play in that $5.5 billion building each year. Just 17 dates. That means for roughly 95% of the calendar year, this megastructure isn't even hosting its primary tenants. It essentially just sits there, completely empty for the vast majority of its existence.
So, you've got to ask yourself, how on earth does a building survive on basically 17 days of work? If you divide that $5.5 billion price tag by those 17 home games, you are staring at over $320 million in fixed cost allocation per game. And that's before a single ticket, jersey, or hot dog is even sold. The isolated football revenue model simply cannot service the massive debt of these structures on its own. The math on a spreadsheet just does not close. So how are these billionaires actually pulling this off?
Well, let's get into Section 1, the taxpayer trap and the public subsidy playbook.
Over $10.6 billion in public funds have been spent on current NFL stadiums. In the U.S., the playbook often relies heavily on local taxpayers funding the stadium's construction, while the private owner, gets to keep the vast majority of the profits. Think of the public as providing this massive, totally free insurance policy for billionaires. If construction costs overrun, or if the stadium mysteriously fails to generate that promised economic boom for the city, the taxpayer absorbs the hit. But if it succeeds, the franchise owner harvests all the upside, watches their asset value skyrocket, and maybe goes out and buys another yacht.
And the evolution of this financial burden is really fascinating. If you look closely here, the dotted line tracking the percentage of public funding has actually dropped from nearly 100% back in the 1970s down to around 38% in the 2020s. But notice those towering bar graphs, because the total overall cost of these megastructures has absolutely skyrocketed over the decades. The raw dollar amount demanded from taxpayers is higher than ever. For example, recent stadium projects for the Bills and the Titans, they're getting around $850 million and $1.2 billion respectively in massive public money injections.
Furthermore, local governments routinely issue tax-exempt municipal bonds to help fund these projects. Because wealthy investors who buy these bonds don't have to pay federal taxes on the interest they earn, the U.S. Treasury actively loses out on that money. Research actually shows that from the year 2000 to 2020, this exact tax loophole cost the United States government about $4.3 billion in lost federal tax revenue. So even if you don't live anywhere near a professional football city, your federal tax dollars are effectively subsidizing these stadiums.
But what happens when public money still isn't quite enough to plug that massive financial gap? That brings us to Section 2, the shadow contract ecosystem.
You see, a modern stadium is actually a complex contract business, carefully designed to monetize absolutely everything before a fan even clicks buy on a ticket. Because the NFL uses a revenue-sharing model where standard ticket sales are partially pulled with all the other teams, the smartest owners find alternative, unshared revenue streams. They sell personal seat licenses, which is literally a massive fee you pay just for the permission to buy a season ticket later. They charge premium fees for parking. They sell pouring rights, meaning a massive beer company pays millions just for the exclusive right to be the only brand flowing from the stadium taps. The owner controls the real estate, meaning they determine exactly who is allowed to charge the 70,000 captive people inside and exactly how much.
Corporate naming rights have also absolutely exploded to plug these structural gaps. Take Pittsburgh, for example. For years, their iconic stadium was famously named Heinz Field, generating about $2.85 million a year for the team. But when that contract was up, a Michigan insurance broker named Acrisure swooped in and paid roughly $10 million a year to put their name on the building. The cost to sponsor a stadium effectively tripled in a single contract cycle. This massive influx of corporate money is absolutely vital to keeping the whole shebang afloat.
And trust me, they need every single penny of that corporate sponsorship because a stadium is essentially a permanently docked cruise ship. It's a massive, fixed-cost machine. Even on a random Tuesday in March with absolutely zero fans in the building, the water pumps still have to work, the complex security systems have to run, and the massive climate control systems must be maintained to keep 70,000 empty seats perfectly chilled. You have basically financed a miniature city that earns its most dependable revenue on roughly 3% of the calendar year, but costs you millions to maintain on the remaining 350 days.
So, to truly justify billions in investment and cover these relentless operational costs, owners have had to evolve. Let's look at Section 3, the real estate anchor. As one of our sources perfectly puts it, the stadium is the bait. The incredible value created by a multi-billion-dollar stadium isn't entirely contained within its own income statement. Instead, it acts as a massive cultural anchor. It's basically a guarantee that millions of people will travel to this specific zip code every single year, instantly driving up the value of all the surrounding dirt. Dirt that, you guessed it, the franchise owner just so happens to completely control.
Let's jump back to SoFi Stadium for a minute. The stadium alone simply doesn't make financial sense, but SoFi anchors Hollywood Park, a 298-acre neighborhood, which, by the way, is larger than the entire Disneyland theme park, and it's completely controlled by the stadium owner. It features 6,000 residential units, a premium event hotel, commercial offices, and 900,000 square feet of retail space. When 70,000 people show up for a Sunday night game or a Taylor Swift concert, they need to eat, sleep, and shop. The stadium generates that massive demand, and the surrounding privately owned real estate captures all that economic spillover, happily collecting rent 365 days a year, long after the stadium crowd heads home.
Now, in this real estate-first model, the financial picture completely flips. Notice how the massive slices here representing real estate, commercial rent, and premium hospitality completely dwarf the actual football revenue. The property is no longer just a sports venue, it is a privately controlled corporate neighborhood. That steady, year-round cash flow from the apartments, commercial offices, and retail spaces pays the massive structural bills, making the actual stadium just one tiny slice of a much, much larger, highly profitable financial pie. Okay, so why doesn't the rest of the world do this? Let's get into Section 4, the American Monopoly Advantage.
It really all comes down to leverage. The US NFL model is built entirely on artificial franchise scarcity. There are exactly 32 teams. If a major city wants the prestige of having one, they're going to have to pay up. Otherwise, the owner will simply hold the city hostage, threatening to pack up the team in moving trucks in the middle of the night and head to a competing city that will gladly build them a brand new, shiny stadium. We can contrast this directly with the UK Premier League model, which relies heavily on a promotion and relegation system.
Over in the UK, there is no artificial restriction on the supply of clubs. If a team performs poorly, they get relegated to a lower league, and another hungry team takes their place. Because clubs are deeply tied to their local communities and earn their spot through actual performance on the pitch, they simply cannot artificially restrict supply to threaten relocation. And the result? Well, UK owners generally have to fund their own stadiums privately. In fact, out of 34 recent Premier League stadiums studied, 26 are privately owned by the club's corporate structure. Without the monopoly leverage of holding a city hostage, that American-style taxpayer stadium subsidy simply vanishes.
Which brings us to our final takeaway in Section 5, a scoreboard or a city. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder today. When you look at the billions of public and private dollars flowing into these massive concrete structures across the United States, you really have to ask yourself, are modern billionaires actually investing in a sports venue, or are they really just building a privately controlled real estate empire that happens to have a scoreboard? Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the economics beneath the surface.